Hello, I'm Bob Dempsey and Chair of Neurosurgery at UW. And we're going to give our update on COVID at a time when we need to learn about what the newest variants or mutations are, learn about the difficulties with vaccines and boosters, new antivirals, and really what is the situation ahead of us. It is, again, another critical time, but I think strongly it's not a time for panic. It's a time to understand what's going on and see what we can do together to solve the problem. This is a fairly important time, and that's why I wanted to sort of speak now. We are 1 year, almost to the day, after the COVID vaccine was first released. We have hit 800,000 US deaths. It's an unimaginable number. And I must point out that 500,000 of them have died after the vaccine was released. We're going to show it's been very effective, it's been very helpful, but modifications are needed. And we're in this for the long haul. We're going to talk about this concept of what is a pandemic, what is endemic disease, and what the future is going to look like, which is going to be okay, but it's going to be different. I think that's important. And historically, we know a lot about pandemics. We know about plague, which lasted hundreds of years, but not continuously. It would rise and fall in hot spots, very much like this. And it would mutate, very much like this. We're going to talk about that process and why there's actually as much hope as there is fear in the virus mutating. And we're going to talk about how this compares to other things like the flu of 1919 or the polio of the earliest part of the 20th century, and how polio seems to have been eliminated by vaccine. Flu keeps dodging and moving endemically through our population. And that's an important perspective to have, because I truly believe we will not only endure this pandemic, we'll prevail. We'll prevail because we're going to do this all together. And that's the most important thing to know. I know that we're tired, we've been through a lot, and people seem to have moved past it, but especially at the hospital, we cannot because we are at the forefront. So what is it about this funny little virus? It is a funny shaped RNA virus. It has these spike proteins, which are important for it to attach. Coronaviruses have been present forever. They are one of them, makes the common cold. Some can. There are many common cold viruses, obviously. But in 1919, we think, the series of mutations which take place in viruses, and mutations in viruses are very common. We think of Darwin teaching us that mammals would evolve by mutation so that finches grew a different beak adapted to a different type of food. That takes millennia because of the turnover for finches or mammals or people. But for viruses, that's all they do is turnover. That's what they do is turn over their DNA, RNA. And if you think of that, that means that they make mistakes often, those are mutations. And often, because they turn over so often, if they make a mistake, that just is eliminated. But sometimes it is adaptive for their survival and allows them to infect other cells better or cause more harm. Infecting better is what they want to do. Causing harm is not necessarily what they wish to do, but they do tend to rupture the cell as part of the replication process. Sometime we think in 2019, a coronavirus of mildly effective in infecting mammals of some sort changed and became very effective at hitting the receptor, which is present in lots of cells in humans, especially in our respiratory epithelium. And by March of 2020, it had grown so rapidly in worldwide importance and told us something about its spread and the ease of spreading a virus worldwide in the modern world, transportation, etc., that we locked down. The lockdown was really quite devastating, perhaps as devastating as the pandemic itself was our response to it. But we prevailed, and we kept going, and we kept people safe. And we discovered who was at greatest risk, the elderly, and who was relatively protected, the young. And that was probably because they had a different quality of immune system. And this continued until December 1 year ago, when a vaccine specific to the mutants alpha and beta of that time was developed. And it particularly looked at that spike protein and was really effective. 95% of the vaccinated people were protected. Yet, we only vaccinated 60% of our population. And that meant there were plenty of available vectors, and it continued, but it continued to decrease. Unfortunately, the virus kept changing and mutating, and probably somewhere in Africa, a mutation took place we call the Delta, and it became very infectious and virulent. This is almost unheard of. Usually these viruses replicate so that they can outcompete the old form, but they may not be as virulent. And that virus tends to die down. More people have it, but it's just like a common cold. You don't even notice it. It becomes endemic in the population. Or the mutation causes them to replace the very virulent form with something that doesn't really replicate well, something like that, and the virus seems to relatively die out, maybe not completely. What happened, of course, was the Delta variant began to not only grow rapidly throughout the world, but cause lots of illness in the unvaccinated. And then gradually, as the vaccine humoral immunity fell, became less effective against stopping the Delta variant, but still disabled it enough so that not as many people died. But this is the situation we're in now, and I'll show you what that looks like. And it would spread from hotspot to hotspot. In the midst of this present Delta surge, we have a new Omicron variant coming, and we need to learn about that because it is outcompeting Delta quite effectively. Now, I said this is a hotspot disease. Right now, the hotspots are the Midwest, a little bit of the Southwest, and the Northeast. Now, it's not because they're lucky, they're better, or they vaccinated more or less. As a matter of fact, some of these areas that vaccinated a lot, but 60% is not enough. And the unvaccinated in that area more than enough to carry it and break through, although milder disease in the breakthrough people is becoming common. And it's just our turn. Michigan, Wisconsin are among the highest prevalences right now. And the Southeast, which was only months ago the highest prevalence, is now calmer. At the present rate, it'll change unless we do something, and it might sweep back to areas because there's still enough people uninfected. And some people think, unfortunately, that you're either going to be vaccinated or infected or dead for this to go away. I hope that's not the case. But unfortunately, that attitude has led people to sort of and not understand that it is natural for people around the world to resist vaccinations. That happens. Zambia is having trouble getting people vaccinated because they're more concerned about AIDS and malaria. Or Nigeria, which has had to waste vaccines because they weren't able to get them in arms fast enough. So what's the situation and what does it really look like in America? On the left is the US numbers over time, and on the right, Wisconsin. They're similar, but not quite. And on the US numbers, you can see before there were vaccines, this was rising and rising and rising and becoming more and more common throughout our population. And then the vaccines came and a precipitous drop. We became quite cocky by June of 2021. We began to start to open up and baseball games started and meetings started and people could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Then this incredibly lucky variant called Delta came and it began to outcompete and completely replace the variants that we were dealing with and we had made the vaccines to. Turned out that the Delta variant was susceptible to the vaccines, but not as well. And it rose again. People began to say, well, perhaps a booster would help, and it did. The booster really significantly increased. So you went from 90% effective to 40% effective to 80% effective, and now an unknown. And the unknown, of course, is that there's a new variant that will outcompete Delta. The situation in Wisconsin is really one of steady rise under Delta. And that's concerning. Because if you look at the next slide, the hospitalizations, you'll see that while the cases and hospitalizations in the country look the same, this curve for hospitalizations is very worrisome. We're almost as bad now as we were last November when we had to shut the hospitals down. And indeed, some of our colleagues, like Swedes in Northern Illinois, are doing those steps now. And we are restricting, we are triaging. And we hope we don't have to go to higher levels because our ICU population is also almost exactly where it was when we closed ICUs to non-emergent patients. So that might come. Deaths are also concerning. They follow almost the exact same curves. So it's important to know that you do not want to get Delta. And if you are unvaccinated and get Delta, you are at great risk, especially if you're older, immune compromised. If you are vaccinated, you are less likely to get Delta, perhaps 20%, as opposed to, maybe 6 times less likely than the unvaccinated, but you could still get sick, but rarely as severe as the unvaccinated. That's still true. And that's why the enthusiasm and importance of the boosters. And quite honestly, I think that's going to be an annual event for a few years where you will get your booster shot, much as we get our flu shots. Now, what does this mean for us at the hospital? Well, we are the epicenter of the problem because our entire economic system, or so-called supply chain, has been affected by the pandemic. As people were sent home from work, not all have come back. And that means truck drivers, CT technologists, nurses, farmers, etc. They just aren't filling the working roles. So we're having difficulty getting variety of products, and we're getting difficulty providing care. So if you're a small community hospital and you are having a shortage of staff, nurses, cooks, floor sweepers, etc., you begin to constrict back to your base job. And you begin to send anything complicated to the major medical center. So as a result, the university hospital, which also is having trouble getting cooks, CT techs, nurses, staff, etc., is having an onslaught of non-COVID emergent patients, brain tumors, strokes, traumas, etc. And we are having a great deal of trouble throughputting them through our system because we don't have enough OR techs, enough nurses, etc. So we are in the midst of a very difficult time that we will only get through together. And that's important to understand. And it's important to understand it's just as bad at that hospital that's trying to send us the patient as it is here. And it's just as difficult to hire cooks there, and whole restaurants are closing because they can't. And so we need to be very creative about ways to solve this. And we need to use and maintain and retain our faculty, staff, assistants as much as possible. And that's important because we're in it together. And that means that we have to take care to make sure we can provide the care we wish indefinitely. So where do these variants come in and what does it mean? Well, basically, a virus does nothing but replicate. That means it has a phenomenally greater opportunity to mutate than other species or humans or mammals or etc. And so it makes lots of mistakes. Those are mutations. some cause that virus to be eliminated. Usually in a pandemic, as it keeps turning over and over, and of course, if we vaccinate everybody in Dane County, it can still grow a mutant in South Africa, and it'll be here within a month. So that's important. We have to vaccinate the whole world. But there is this idea of the mutations perhaps eliminating the virulence of the virus. Many pandemics, including the 1919 pandemic, ended that way. The virus mutated, and what they usually do is the mutation isn't particularly good for the virus. It may make it spread more, but that doesn't make people very sick. And so they might have a subclinical case, and the virus can't find enough people to infect, and it begins to die down to a pandemic. And you don't hear about it again until and unless there are a lot of unvaccinated people or uninfected people, or another variation or mutation makes it more virulent. Now, Delta was the remarkable variant that made the previous Beta variant, which we had the vaccination to, much more easier to catch and much more virulent. Thank God we had the vaccines, or it would have been even greater disaster. But that's that peak we're seeing now. That's Delta. And we see that we can cut it down with the booster shot. That's important. And then we can see that those vaccinated people that get the Delta variant aren't as sick. So yes, we need the mask, and yes, we need to wash our hands, and yes, we need to separate, but we need to get on with life. Along comes the Omicron. Now, Omicron is another variant, another mutation. But this mutation, there are many more mutations on this particular virus than there were on Delta or Beta, which is unusual. And it makes it very infectious, maybe 3 times more infectious than Delta, which means it will replace Delta. But it seems to be about as third as virulent. Maybe this is going to help us eliminate this by replacing the really virulent form with a less virulent form. I don't know. If you run the numbers, you can see the hospitals are going to be just as crowded. But maybe with the vaccine, the people won't be as sick and won't be in the hospitals and won't die as much. There is significant hope for that. And this idea of a virus mutating itself out of existence is real. We need to speed that up by vaccines, isolation, separation, and treating the entire world, because we are one world now. A virus in one continent spreads to the other rapidly. We will see this taking over for Delta as it has in some parts of Africa. And our hope, initial reports are, that people aren't as sick. We have to see. So what's next for us? Well, lots. Vaccines, new and old, and boosters. They're a good idea, especially the two that seem to be so strong, which is the Pfizer and Moderna. There'll be more. It will probably include regular boosters. I predict that we'll combine it with the flu shot. And remember, don't forget the flu shot. We see seasonal peaks of respiratory fatal viruses. They've been called flu, really at a much lower scale than this COVID virus did, but we cannot allow it to get the flu shot. Getting the flu will only weaken you and your immunity to another virus like this. Antivirals are coming out rapidly, and they're very effective. And they don't need immunity. They don't need humoral immunity. They work differently. They often target, such as the receptor protein that the virus must attach to. And so they have a more broader efficacy. They look good, they'll be expensive, but they will change the coming year for the amount of people that die or be hospitalized. They won't keep you from getting the virus. Vaccine can do that. Masks can do that. But they may keep us alive, and they may help the hospitals. keep from overflowing with COVID patients. But don't be confused. UW Hospital is crowded to the ceiling with patients, only some of which are COVID. We have a vast majority of just sick people being transferred here because we do good work. And we need to continue that. And that gradually we need to see this pandemic become endemic, something we live with like cold, we take booster shots too. And the reason we look at that, the reason we're hopeful for that is all you all. That is to say, we're a team, we're in together. And it isn't just our medical team. It's your family, it's your coworkers, it's the people that mask up in the store. And I don't think we need to have a law to say that. This is common sense, how we protect each other. And we need to look at it that way. This is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue. And I have great faith in all of us. I do feel we will not just endure this, we'll prevail, we'll be different. Our lives will be different and more cautious, but we'll be better for it. And so with that, I hope we only the best for you in this holiday season and the best for the new year. I don't think we'll eliminate it, but we'll prevail. Thanks so much.